So this topic of yourself and others, in a sense, is everything. And when I've been thinking about it in the last few days, and I've been thinking about it very, very intensely, and feeling a little bit overwhelmed sometimes, because this has been my work for 30 years. More than 30 years, really. It's been the work of my lifetime, but I've been writing about it for 30 years. Really to think about this dance of relationship between yourself and others, which so deeply, so profoundly, in fact, depends on the way that you think about yourself. And this is, of course, never static. You know, it changes from moment to moment to moment. So what we're talking about is something with huge amounts of vitality. And I think that's very, very encouraging. I think it's very encouraging that no matter how much you long to fix yourself in this moment of bliss, or to find yourself truly at home in this moment of hopefulness, that will change. But it's also consoling to know that when you find yourself in a moment of desolation, or heartache, or when you're struggling with forgiveness, or some other issue, or somebody has profoundly disappointed you, or you've radically disappointed yourself, that moment will also pass. So whatever we can say about yourself and others is on a continuous path of unfolding. So that consoled me a little bit when I thought, what on earth am I going to select to think about? What is it that this group needs, that you need listening today in your thinking about yourself and others? And the other thing that came to me very strongly was the sense of a triangle. That if we think of each point of the triangle, yourself, others, and of course you experience others in a vast variety of ways, depending upon who those others are. And there can be some refining and some simplicity there. And I hope that will emerge in this short time that we have together. But the other corner, so whichever way we turn the triangle, one could be at the top, then the other, is of course the way that you think about, the way that you regard, the way that you receive, the way that you move towards and retreat from God. Now, for some of you, God is a less familiar word or an uncomfortable word than, for example, if I was to speak about life with a capital L. But the source of your being is the other point of this triangle. And there's a constant movement. The interaction is absolutely inevitable, shaping and profound. That if you, for example, had been conditioned and trained, and the mind, the conscious mind is very plastic, it's very conditionable, it can be trained. If you have been trained, for example, to think about a highly judgmental God who lives in relationship to you in judgment of you, then your experience of yourself and your experience of others will be very different from if you have allowed yourself to begin to know your source of being, your ground of being, your beloved, as unconditionally accepting. And even though this feels a little more interventionist than I'm comfortable with, could I say, just to use these words, encouraging of your nature of love, your nature of peacemaking. If that is your experience of this force that is greater than yourself, this consciousness of soul and spirit that transcends your very intimate knowledge of the weakness of your personalities and your everyday embodied self, as well as your strengths. If you are more familiar with that picture, then it will shift quite radically the generosity and tolerance with which you can see the other, the others, the so-called others. Here's a poem from Rumi. Every tree, every growing thing as it grows, affirms one truth. You harvest what you sow. Now, what it means, I think, is that the thoughts that we plant, the thoughts that we water with our close attention, and close attention means our constant returning to them, our rehearsing and our re-rehearsing of certain attitudes, which is what we all do, will bring certain kinds of actions to fruition. As we think, so we will act, but as we believe, so we will think. This is really, really crucial in somewhat, at least, reframing the ways that we think about ourselves and others. If we think very obsessively, I think I can use that word because we often do. If we think very obsessively about our weaknesses and our failings, we are very much more likely to see them writ large in other people. Or, if we are so afraid of our weaknesses and failings that we can't even think about them, then we are very, very likely to just see them in other people, to project all our discomfort outwards. And then we will harvest what we have sown. All that you can see, says Rumi, has its roots in the unseen. Now, this is very interesting because, of course, Rumi was speaking to us long before Freud gave us the picture of the unconscious. But what Rumi was talking about was not just our individual unconscious, but also about the unseen forces. He was talking from the perspective of a spiritual master, not of a psychological master, of a spiritual master. That the soul, that the life of the soul, that the life of the unseen is constantly working on us and through us. It is also working on and through all of those that we call the other. Yeah? And how do we tune to this? How do we tune to the refinements of this? Well, we're going to talk a lot about that over these days. We're going to talk a lot about how we tune to what the so-called unseen, the instinct, the imagination, the inspiration that is constantly pouring to us, that is constantly feeding to us a far more generous vision of who we are and how we can be. Forms change, says Rumi, and essence remains. Every sight will vanish, however gorgeous, and that's true. That's the nature of life, isn't it? Every sight will vanish, however gorgeous, however we want to hold on to it because it is so gorgeous. It will go. And what will stay? What will stay are the resonances of what we've paid attention to. That is how we are creating ourselves at all times. The resonances of what we are paying attention to, which is why we are so privileged. why we are so privileged to be on retreat and to be listening freshly today to these teachings. Not my teachings, to these teachings that belong to all of us, that don't belong to me any more than they belong to you, that they don't belong to any one tradition any more than they belong to all of humanity. Every word, says Rumi, will fade, however sweet. But be strong of heart, because where they come from is everlasting and ever renewing. Now, we could really all go home now, because what you have there is an invitation to recognize that you have within yourself a source of what is everlasting and ever renewing. There are so many ways to describe this. I return faithfully to the words of George Fox because they sit so well with me, and I find that they sit so well with many people. This is a way of talking about Buddha nature. It's a way of talking about soul consciousness. And Philippa will be speaking to you more about soul consciousness this evening. It's a way of talking about the eternal self. And it's a way of identifying with your true nature, with the you-ness of you, which is still so unique, which is still so preciously Christine-ish, which is still so Caroline-ish, which is still so Janish, which is still so Rosish. It is so unique at the same time as it is eternal. And what this marvelous, radical, God-loving man, George Fox, said. George Fox, who believed, if he believed anything, that there is no need to have anyone between you and your loving God, who shocked his not-so-merry England by really affirming that you did not have any need for priests to kind of conduct you to the throne of God. No, what George Fox was telling you was there is an immediacy and an intimacy in this relationship with your ground of being, with your source of all, with your beloved. And he was pilloried for this because the institutional church was, of course, utterly offended by it. So just the picture of who you're going to hear from now. George Fox, radical man. Walk lightly on this earth. Already a most beautiful teaching for our 21st century life. Walk lightly on this earth. And I also take this to mean, let's take our spiritual evolution with lightness of heart. Let's avoid solemnity. This is not to say we can avoid commitment or that we don't take our privileges seriously and with unlimited gratitude. Because we do, because we can, because we are. But we can also bring to our task of unfolding, our privilege of unfolding, some lightness of heart. So walk lightly in your embodied state on this earth, George Fox might have said, had he been a 21st century man, and had the marvellous teachings of the East been more available to him. Walk lightly on this earth, answering that of God in everyone. Now, isn't answering a most beautiful word? Answering. Not asking for, not giving advice about, not even preaching to, although Quakers in the early days did preach. They don't any longer, unless they're interfaith ministers. But one would preach and one would pray, because both actions were required. Answering really means reflecting upon that of God in everyone. In other words, this brings you immediately and unconditionally into right relationship with the so-called other. That is, you meet not only as human beings, you meet as beings of light, eternal souls, which really makes all the differences between us that we harp upon so obsessively, that we go to war about, that we slaughter for, so utterly, inescapably obscene. We, as a conditioned people, worship the differences between us. Even when we have really thought about this for a long time, the conditioned mind still brings us into a fairly constant state of judgment about other people. And why does it do that? Because we live in a fairly constant state of judgment rather than acceptance, appreciation, and encouragement of ourselves. Many of us live in a fairly hostile relationship to ourselves, a critical relationship, a disparaging and sometimes disrespectful relationship with ourselves, or the opposite of that, which is a highly defended relationship, so that we're so fearful of any weakness that we have a kind of false strength that also keeps us from really experiencing compassion for ourselves and compassion for the other. And all of these difficulties that I'm naming, because it's good to name them, because then we can really, let them go where they're not serving us well. And these are the difficulties that are very common to all of us, and they don't serve us well, and we all know that. And when we name them, when we begin to familiarize ourselves with them, they have far less grip on us. It's when we're less conscious of them, or when we think they're natural or inevitable, that they hold us in their grip. And in those moments, of course, we are far less free than we could be. We are less free to see that of God, as John George Fox put it. We are less free to see the spiritual nature that we share with every other living being. We are less free to see that, and we are also less free to bring to our preoccupations, our challenges, and even to our joys. We are less free to bring to them a wholeheartedness that would allow us to be thoroughly present to them. That would allow us to be thoroughly present to them. Back to Rumi. If God spoke and said, "Rumi, give due to all that has brought you to my arms." In other words, give due to everything that has reminded you of who and what you are, of who and what you are, of how precious this gift of life is, yeah? How we can focus on what is renewing us and not just on what is wrong. If God spoke and said, give due to each of you, give due to everything that has brought you to my arms, Rumi says, there would not be a single thought, feeling or action that would not cause me to bow down. And this is also a most beautiful teaching, and I'm going to give you an example of it in just a moment. What it means is that we can heal some of the splitting that we are so habitually doing. We are often splitting ourselves from ourselves, which of course engenders a kind of splitting from others too. We are constantly saying, oh, I did this well, oh, I did this badly, oh, I'm getting what I want, oh, I'm not getting what I want, oh, this is completely marvellous, oh, this is quite horrible, oh, I'm wasting my time, oh, this time is... We're constantly splitting. Instead of bringing ourselves a picture of wholeness, what am I learning here? What am I gaining here? What is this misadventure teaching me? What am I taking from this? What is revealing itself to me through this? And I'm going to give you a very short, very practical example. This is from a chapter called Love Generously, which is really what we're all about this time. You arrive home tired at the end of a long and frustrating day. This story is not entirely lacking in autobiographical detail. 3 school packs are dumped by the door, along with shoes, a hockey stick and a pile of sweatshirts. The dogs have not been fed. Your daughters are playing different music loudly in their rooms and your son is on the phone. Your head is throbbing. You begin to unpack the mountain of groceries you have lugged in alone from the car, slamming things into the cupboards and the fridge. Suddenly, your son is standing beside you. Through some miracle of unrequested grace, you look at him before you complain. Looking into his eyes, you see someone who is infinitely precious. You recognize him freshly. Your anger goes, and love takes its place. Quite unexpectedly, you feel tremendous gratitude that you have food for your children, that you are all home and safe, that you have a house to live in, that these fine young people who a moment ago were yet another irritation are in fact people you know intimately. What connects you most deeply is love. And with a single intake of breath, everything looks and feels different. You are living love. Om Shanti.